Welcome to tonight's virtual Civil War presentation brought to you by CivilWarTalk.com. Thanks for joining us. The program tonight, Living Shadows of the Passing Time, features fantastic images and the stories behind those faces. We're honored tonight to have with us Ronald S Coddington, editor and publisher of Military Images. He will be serving as the moderator. Mr. Coddington has gathered together a panel of 9 stellar image collectors: Michele Behan, Michele Behan, Rick Brown, Kevin Canberg, Ron Field, Adam Fleischer, Paul Hoza, Mike Huston, Kurt Luther, and David Wynn Vaughan. These collectors will each share their favorite Civil War era image from their collection and the compelling story that goes with it. This series is provided by CivilWarTalk.com, the American Civil War discussion forum, and we're pleased to be able to bring great programs like this one to you each week through the virtual platform. Over at the Civil War Talk forum, the discussion forum, there's always great content waiting for you. There's 127,000 different discussion threads and more than 26,000 members who add new content every day. It's super easy to join and it's always free. It's always free. If you want to eliminate ads from your Civil War Talk membership, you can do that by purchasing a premium membership, but that is not required. A premium membership only removes the ads from your page, and those premium memberships are available for as little as $12 a year. If you aren't already a member of Civil War Talk, I hope that we'll see you in the Civil War Talk community very soon.
Ronald S. Coddington is the editor and publisher of Military Images, showcasing, interpreting, and preserving Civil War images since 1979. In addition to the incredible work he does for Military Images, Mr. Coddington has published Faces of the Civil War, an album of Union soldiers and their stories, Faces of the Confederacy, an album of Southern soldiers and their stories, African American Faces of War, an album, Faces of the Civil War Navies, an album of Union and Confederate sailors, and his 5th and final volume in the series, Faces of Civil War Nurses, which was released in October 2020. All are published by the Johns Hopkins University Press. Mr. Coddington is a good friend of Civil War Talk, having been a featured guest many times on the series. We appreciate so much his kind assistance in recruiting the collectors and managing the format for tonight's presentation. Please join me in welcoming Ronald S. Coddington.
Dina, thank you so much for the introduction. A big thank you to Laura and Ashley and everyone at Civil War Talk for doing all the wonderful things that you do. This video series has been wonderful, a wonderful opportunity to showcase Civil War photography. And here we are doing it again this evening. I also want to give a big thanks to all of you who registered for the program this evening. Looks like we have a full house. So thank you so much for being part of this presentation. I do want to pause for a moment to mention and recognize one person who I think would really have loved to have been here tonight, and that's Joe McGee, a collector who lost his battle with COVID, and many of us in the collecting community just found out about that yesterday. So Joe is in my thoughts, his family is in my thoughts. I'll be thinking of him this evening. So on with the program. For those of you who might be wondering about the title, the title of the program, Living Shadows of the Passing Time, is part of a quote. The individual who wrote that quote is a Civil War photographer. His name is Thomas W. Banks. Perhaps not a name you know. However, you probably know an iconic photograph that he took in 1865 of the Sultana at the wharf boat in Helena, Arkansas in April 1865, not long before all the passengers or many of the passengers on that ship sunk. So Banks went on to be a well-known high-profile photographer in Arkansas and in the Southwest region of the United States. In the late 19th century, he wrote a wonderful monograph about the early history of photography. And he ended it with these lines. He says, "Science invented a photographer of its own who dips his pencil in the sunbeam and traces with unerring truth the living shadows of the passing time." I think that's a wonderful way to summarize the intersection of art and science and entrepreneurship that Thomas W. Banks and other photographers practiced during the Civil War period and after the war. Banks and so many other photographers left behind the images that we collect. The first collectors were actually the Civil War soldiers, their families and their friends. They were the first collectors. Over the generations, that collecting has continued. There were moments in time when those albums landed in dusty attics and in damp basements. But the folks that you see and you'll hear from tonight are the individuals who feel the same power of those images and are doing their part to showcase, interpret, and preserve these incredible relics that are such an important part, such a relevant part of our American history and our American story. So these individuals you're going to meet tonight come from all different walks of life, and their Civil War collecting journey is in different places. There's one thing that unites all of them. They're united by that passion that they have for showcase, interpreting, and preserving. They're also united in the fact that choosing a single favorite image is almost impossible. It's incredibly difficult. So I want to thank them for going through their collections and making that hard choice. As if that wasn't enough, another hard choice is the guidelines, the rules for this. Each individual, each collector is going to have only 5 minutes to talk about their image so we can keep the conversation moving and showcase all these wonderful images tonight. So I've said enough. I know you want to see the photographs and listen to these stories. So let's get started. And we're going to begin with David Wynn Vaughan. And I'm going to share my screen so we can see his photograph.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Laura, for the invitation. There we go. It was difficult to find one photograph that is my favorite. I've probably got 30 that I could put in this category. So that took me back to square one. What is my collecting criteria that would select an image as number one? And I went back and created 4 areas, and I'll walk through these very quickly. When I collect, I'm looking for the 5 C's, if you will. Collecting, that's got to meet at least a high mark on these for me to be interested in purchasing and acquiring a photograph. Clarity, contrast, condition, content, and Confederate. That's something that's very specific for me. I love Confederate images and really try to focus my collection on those. In this particular image, the clarity is excellent. I mean, you can see the nap in his uniform. The contrast is exceptional. I don't know that you're going to find a better photograph from that time period. The condition is excellent. There's very minor solarization. There are no scratches on the image. The content's killer. He's triple armed. He's Confederate. He has a Corsican cap. And it's just, it hardly gets better than that. And the final one is he's Confederate, and Confederates are harder to find. They're scarce. And for me, I collect Georgia, and he's a Georgian. My second box to check was format and composition. I love large format photography. I love tinted images. I love when they cross over and they have an artistic feel, some almost resembling an oil painting or artwork. This is a half plate ambrotype. You don't need glasses to see it. It's large. There is some faint tinting on his Corsican cap. So aesthetically, he's nicely posed. It's a very fine photograph in that respect. He's triple armed. He has an infield rifle, fixed bayonet, a Colt Model 1849 pocket percussion cap pistol, 31 caliber, clip point Bowie knife with a coffin handle, and his scabbard is attached to his belt. The infield rifle and pistol are most likely props, photographer props, as mounted cavalry rarely use muskets and pistols. He doesn't have a holster, so chances are he picked the pistol up from the photographer or someone waiting in line to have their image made. On a side note, I've seen another soldier in front of, from the 38th Georgia named William Booth in front of this same backdrop. So that's one of those things that will send you down a rabbit hole, because now you've opened up all of these areas of interest. And so to try to find out where this image was made is one of the next things that's, that I have to unravel, but I'll need to have 4 or 5 identified images to be able to crisscross their service and find out if they were in a common city. The third box for me to check is history and provenance. The history of this image is spectacular. He's identified. His name is Private James Huston House. He served in Company E, the Jackson County Cavalry, 13th Regiment, Georgia Cavalry. They served in the Army of Tennessee. And early in the war, the 16th Georgia served under John Hunt Morgan and participated in the first cavalry raids in Kentucky. And in 1862, a 24-day assault with 900 cavalrymen covering almost 1,000 miles. They captured 17 towns, apprehended and paroled a reported 1,200 prisoners, recruited 300 troopers, confiscated several hundred horses, destroyed railroads and telegraph lines, and seized and demolished immense amounts of federal supplies and weapons. President Abraham Lincoln commented, "They must be having a stampede in Kentucky." Great amount of history. The 13th Georgia, a lot of the cavalry units, and especially ones that served all the way up through the war, some of their records were lost during or after the war. So you have to piecemeal some of their service records back together. But these guys were skirmishing and fighting almost the day that they went in. They were the eyes and ears of the Army. So they were constantly in contact with the enemy. The provenance on this came right out of the family. This image was sold to a gun dealer. It was then sold to an antique dealer in Statham, in Watkinsville, Georgia, just outside of Athens. Now, this is my 4th box to check. This is a collecting story, and this is one of the things that we all relate to as collectors. I got a phone call about 10 or 12 years ago, back when I was in the corporate world. I'm sitting at my desk, and a picker friend of mine called and said, "You're not going to believe this, but there's a half plate and a 6 plate of identified Georgians came out of the family. You've got to get here. These things are not going to be around long." And in the background, I could hear somebody else talking, and it sounded like there was a little bit of urgency about his call. And I said, "Who's on the phone?" And he said, "There's another person here, and he's talking to another image collector." So I knew I needed to move very quick. And so I said, "Listen, it's 4 o'clock. It's an hour and a half on a busy day. I can't get there." And tell the antique owner, the shop owner, that I'll be there first thing in the morning, and please, do not sell the images before I have a chance to look at them. And so I left the house early. I was waiting there at 8:30, 9 o'clock. He opens at 10. And lo and behold, there was nobody else around, which was in amazement. So we talked for quite some time, and he gave me all the family information. He wouldn't budge on his price. He was very firm. And I paid cash for it and walked out and drove home. Had to pull over about 10 times on the way home to open the images and look at them. And, it was just incredible. Again, this is one of my favorite images. I have a picture of his brother. He was killed in Knoxville. They served in the same regiment, and he's triple armed. He's just got a great look about him as well. I knew the family because of some of the information that came with this image, and I actually went by. They still live in Statham, Georgia, probably just a few hundred feet from where this man lived and farmed. And they didn't really know much about him, and didn't know where he was buried. And I knew he was buried in the Chapel Hill cemetery, which was literally across the road and about 100 yards down the street. And we're heading back to Atlanta one evening, and I was with my wife and pulled into the church parking lot, and she said, please tell me you're not going to walk the cemetery. It's almost dark. And I said, no, I just want to look at a couple of quick tombstones. I'll be right out. And as soon as I pulled in, the headlights hit William Houston or James Houston House's tombstone. So she was saved. I didn't have to go in. But that's my quick story about my favorite image. And this is one of the ones that would be up in definitely my top 5. But it really meets all of the collecting criteria. And I hope you've enjoyed my story. Ron?
David, thank you so much. And in my excitement to get started, I neglected to let everyone participating know. But now you already know that David is a passionate collector of Georgia images. About a decade ago, the Met in New York had an incredible Civil War photography exhibit, and David's images were a conspicuous part of that exhibit that stopped at a couple different places in the country. So David, thanks so much for participating.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Next, I want to introduce Mike Huston. Mike is someone that I have recently come to know through this image that he's going to talk about tonight. He is a passionate and committed collector around Iowa photography. And I'm pleased to tell you that thanks to Mike's interest and the communications that we had around this image, we're now talking about doing an Iowa issue in Military Images. And it's going to be this winter, or I should say a year from now, the winter of 2023 is going to be the Iowa issue. So I know Mike is hard at work on that. I've been gathering some scans from past years, so I'm really looking forward to the collaboration. And with that, Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ron. Ron had mentioned earlier that we have a group here that's kind of comes from all walks of life or different levels of collecting. And I think it's probably safe for me to say that I'm probably the newest or least experienced of the bunch. So I first started collecting 2 years ago when I was actually gifted a tintype image. And honestly, at that point in time, 2 years ago, I didn't know the difference between an ambrotype, a tintype, a CDV. I mean, to say that I was a beginner would be an understatement. So to get to where I'm at now and have opportunity to acquire some of the images I have is pretty amazing to me to see what's out there. But I guess tonight, what I want to say is if there are collectors that are new, or maybe you haven't started collecting, but you have an interest, what I've found is that through Civil War Faces on Facebook and through a lot of the folks that are on this panel tonight, they're really helpful. Don't be intimidated. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And there's still a lot out there. So I'll kind of jump into that, I guess, on how this came to be. So part of being the new guy, I guess, is they kind of let me, so they said we need to focus on one image, but instead I picked 110. So I'm not going to talk about each one individually, but I do want to talk about the piece and kind of the journey and what happened. So last February, I purchased an image on eBay. It was a CDV image of a soldier by the name of William C. Porter. So if you're looking at your screen now, on the left-hand side, there are 2 carte de visites on the left. You work your way down, he's the second one from the top. So the Porter image was of interest to me because Porter served in Company C of the 19th Iowa, and Company C were all boys that were from Washington County, which is my home county. So I was really excited, not only to be able to add an image from Washington County, which is kind of the focus of my collection, but he happened to serve in a unit, Company C, 19th Iowa, that my wife's great-great-grandfather was also in. So that was, special to add that image as well. I didn't pay a lot of attention to the image, I guess, when I first bought it on eBay, but after I got it home, I got to look in and I saw that there was a name that was affixed to it that was pasted on the front that also had a number. Then I flipped the image over, and on the back, I saw a couple marks where it had been pasted to something. So I assumed, well, this has been pasted to something else, in the past. Again, I was new to collecting, but I knew that some of the GAR posts, they used to make these composites. So I thought, well, maybe it was part of a larger piece. I imagined it probably was long gone by this time, but I wanted to kind of look into it. So I sent the eBay seller a message. I asked the seller, did this happen to come from another collection? Do you know where it came from? And she said, well, yes, I have a large composite. There are about a dozen images now that are loose. I sold one a couple of weeks ago, and I'm actually planning on selling the rest. And so I said, well, whoa, don't do that, please. Let's try and keep it together. So through some negotiation with the seller, I was able to convince her that please keep the piece intact. I want to purchase, the entire piece. So I was really thankful to them for doing that. As people that have been collecting for a long time, we know that these images probably could have provided more value to her, and she could have made more money by selling it individually, but that wasn't the right thing to do. So really excited to add the piece. The seller, they were in Virginia, we were in Iowa. She told me that the piece had originated in Iowa from an estate sale. They purchased it about 20 years ago. They were going to be going to Louisville, Kentucky in July to what's called the Show of Shows, which is Militaria show, and said, why don't you meet us there and we can make the transaction there and you can pick it up and bring it home. So fast forward to July, we went to Louisville, we brought it back. As soon as we brought it back, I took it to a professional conservator in Ames, who she deframed it, she cleaned it, she took the loose images and reattached them. And what you see there is a scan, archival scan that we had made of the piece. So I'll talk a little bit about the piece itself. In 1882, John W. Morton. So again, if you go over to the left-hand side of the composite and 3 images down is the image of John W. Morton. Morton served in Company C of the 19th, and he was one of the last survivors of the unit. And he was kind of the chief historian, I guess, of the regiment, kind of held them all together. And in 1882, he posted some articles or advertisements in the local newspaper asking the soldiers, please send me a picture of yourself. I'd like to make a composite. He also wrote letters to all the survivors and asked them to do the same. And he was able to collect all of these images, through those efforts. So the composite first started out as post-war albumin images. He affixed them to this paper, which has some amazing artwork. There's some graphite artwork there. You can see the flags, you can see a stand of arms and a camp scene down at the bottom left. The bottom right is kind of a farm scene. The vast majority of these soldiers, they were farmers. About 90% of them claimed their occupation at the time of their enlistment as being farmers. So you can see some tools there that are laid on the ground as if they laid their tools down and they went off to serve. So then around the outside, so he collected all these, had the composite finished in about 1884. At that point in time, he made facsimile copies. So he made facsimile copies that then could be given to or sold to the soldiers that served in the unit. And then he was selling those facsimile copies for $3 at that point in time. I have been able to track down at least 2 of the facsimile copies. There is one of the facsimiles that's in the collection of Prairie Grove Battlefield State Park in Arkansas, which this unit had some pretty severe casualties there at Prairie Grove. And then also recently, I discovered that there's another facsimile composite in our very own historical society. So if there's anything I can tell you is sometimes you don't have to look very far. Silly me, I should have started there and looked there first, but I just discovered that a couple days ago. And then after he had the facsimile copies made, I believe this was probably his personal copy. And then he added the CDV images around the outside. So there are a total of 33 wartime CDV images that are on the outside. I'm assuming he probably traded some of his own images to acquire those. And then again, this was kind of his personal copy. So really excited to add this piece to my collection. I focus primarily on Washington County, Iowa soldiers, and to be able to add 33 wartime images of Washington County, Iowa guys, at one time was just pretty astonishing. And for folks that are new to collecting, again, there's a lot still out there. I think there's probably folks that have Civil War images that don't even realize it. So I would encourage you to learn and get educated. Oh yeah, and I got to finish with this too. So the plot thickens, I guess, as they say, or as David mentioned earlier, you kind of get down a rabbit hole. So through this, I was able to privileged to write an article in Military Images that was published in the December issue. Then also I donated a copy of the original composite. I donated to a local military museum. They in turn contacted local news station who did an interview with me. And within about a week after I did the interview with the local news station, I had a man that lives right here in my hometown of about 1,300 people. He reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have some personal belongings of John Morton's that I think you might be interested in." And it was in the evening, and I said, "Well, when can we get together? Let's get together tomorrow." And it didn't work in his schedule. It took about a day or so, but he came over and I was just blown away. And so he showed up with these two images, tintype images of Morton. So Morton was the guy who assembled this composite. I had seen copies of this image of the seated image of Morgan with the Colt Dragoon. I'd seen him, I'd seen that image online before. And I asked the gentleman that came to my house with these images, I said, "Have you ever put it online?" And he said, "No." So my belief is that Morton probably had CDV copies made of this tintype, and maybe those were the CDVs that he traded for the other images that are on the border. So he showed up with these two tintype images, as well as the Bible that John W. Morton carried throughout his service. So again, it's amazing that these things are still out there. The interesting thing to me was the local gentleman that brought these images to me and brought the items of Morton to me. He said that they came from an estate about 20 years ago. So I really believe that these images, the Bible, all the personal belongings of Morton's probably were all together right here in my hometown, 20 years ago. And then they got split up. And then now I'm kind of working on bringing them back together. But it's been fun, really amazing, just kind of how it's all come together. So I really appreciate the invitation. I want to thank everybody that's on here. Guys like Kevin have helped me out a lot. I've sent him a lot of messages. Adam, I've sent messages via Facebook. Ron, both Ron. So, thanks to everybody. And hopefully that kind of answers your questions.
Great. Mike, thanks so much. I really appreciate all that you're doing to explore your county history, explore the larger connections to the war. And also, when we first became acquainted, I was completely blown away by your effort to preserve, from getting into professional conservation to making the copies. It's wonderful. So thank you for that. Next up, we're going to meet Adam Oaksfleischer. Adam is the owner of Fleischer's Fine Antiques, and it is a wonderful, wonderful destination if you're looking to add to your collection. Also, Adam is the author of Behind the Backdrop, which is a column that appears in each issue of the magazine. Adam explores different backdrops and provides histories about those backdrops. The paintings that you see, puts it in context to the town or where we think they came from, or I should say where he thinks they came from, based on all the great research that he does. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam. Go for it.
Thanks, Ron.
Sure.
So I'll be brief here. These are two tintypes that almost certainly depict the same individual. He's shown in both images in front of one of the Benton Barracks backdrops. Benton Barracks was a fort that was located in St. Louis. What distinguishes these images from the thousands and thousands of other portraits that were taken during the war is that the subject is African American. Now, interestingly, when you investigate the sheer number of African American troops who enlisted and served during the war, there should be more images out there, but there just aren't. And there are a lot of different factors that I think contribute to that, but we can talk about that at another time. So part of the reason I chose these two as my favorite is just solely due to the rarity of the subject matter. I don't think the odds are good I'll ever find comparable views again in my lifetime. And I'm relatively young. So, you know, if I eat right and I exercise, maybe I'll find some, but who knows? So watch out. But the real reason I chose these is probably due to the portrait on the left from the viewer's perspective. I think we have a tendency sometimes as collectors to project a lot onto images that might not be there. And that's part of the fun of interpretation and part of the fun of being a collector too. But I really do think in this shot, the subject is trying to convey like an air of sophistication. It's just so candid and unusual, the way he's resting his head on his hand with his finger at his temple. And even if he weren't African-American, this would just be very, very unusual. He isn't really looking stoic in that image or trying to look fierce. He's more contemplative. And the way he's looking up as his head is turned slightly downward, he almost appears to be peering right into you from across time and space. So I think especially for someone who may have been enslaved until very recently, who knows, right? It's a powerful artistic choice of posture. And it might be someone who's expressing their agency and personality for the first time. So it's for those reasons that these two are my favorite images.
Excellent. Adam, thank you. I want to underscore what you said about interpretation and how that's part of what we do as collectors. It's part of the motto of the magazine, this idea, all of the content in these images, the poses, the uniforms, the swords, the revolvers, all the equipment, the backdrops, the format, if there's a photographer's imprint, all of these things are part of that opportunity to interpret and to glean more information from these images to help us understand the backstory. So, and I agree with you, this is incredibly rare. It would be rare to have one of them, but to have two of them of the same individual in a case together is about as rare as it can be. So
if I have just one more second too, and David
Sure.
mentioned collecting stories, and Mike told a great story too about how he came to acquire his collage of Iowa images. This is one of those instances. Somebody put this on social media several years ago, and I saw it and I thought, I just need to have that damn thing. So I messaged him and bothered him incessantly to the point where I'm sure he was very close to getting a restraining order, and finally convinced him to sell it. And I thought to myself, I can't even give him 24 hours to change his mind. So the second he said, yes, I'll sell it to you, we agreed on a price, I drove to St. Louis and he got them the next day. But it's interesting to note too, and that reminds me, that these were found in St. Louis in the 1970s by the person who sold them to me. And I think that he said that he got them from part of like an estate cleanout. So it probably, I mean, these were taken in St. Louis in 1863, 1865, and they probably stayed there for the next 100 years. Well, 150 years until I picked them up.
Wow.
So rather extraordinary.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate it, Adam. We're going to move along now to Rick Brown. Rick is someone that I met in 2014 when I became editor and publisher of the magazine. And a mutual friend of ours, Rick Carlisle, said, you have to meet Rick Brown. Rick's energy, his enthusiasm, his ability to step in and help the magazine, which at that point had fallen on some hard times, his willingness to connect with other collectors, to share generously from his collection. We featured his gallery in the second issue under my editorship. I believe really helped reestablish military images to its original place, to be able to help build enthusiasm and excitement about photo collecting. Rick is also now an executive editor of the magazine, and he has a terrific collection, and he's going to share one of them with you right now. So over to you, Rick.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you to everybody that's taking the time to join us tonight. I chose this image under the idea of favorites, or maybe just even the most interesting. And so this, to a lot of people, this looks pretty unusual. It's not clearly focused, and really, so to just start off, the importance is what this is. It's similar to what Mike Huston went through earlier of, an assembled number of CDVs is what this is. It's CDVs, and if you can start with the upper left gentleman, you'll notice that they're nailed onto a board. You can actually see those nails in the upper left, and then the lower left and the lower right of the upper left CDV. And then they were taken by a photographer, so it's actually a composite at the time. Now, who these men are actually, they're bushwhackers, guerrillas. These are men, including, it's Bloody Bill Anderson and some of his men. I found this a couple of years ago on eBay, of all places. And I'll just go through some of these folks. If the people don't know who Bloody Bill Anderson is and his men, the real high level is and I'm sure there could be more accurate sources, but around 80 men who, were under Bloody Bill Anderson, and they're known as the most gruesome guerrillas, bushwhackers operating at the time. The CDV in the center is Bloody Bill Anderson. At a glancing view, you can actually see his face a little bit better. The discoloration that you see in the upper part of the CDV, I think actually could be tinting to the original image. The photographer, somebody else, if you look to the upper left and the upper right of Bloody Bill Anderson within the carte de visite, you'll see 2 black lines and 2 red lines. I'm not sure exactly what those are, but they could even be the flags of Anderson's company. And this image here, for the people on within the Zoom call here, this is actually the first time that some of these guys will ever be published, or you'll know it's a known view of these gentlemen. The man in the upper left, we're going to start with him. His name is Nathan Carr, and he was at least at Centralia, and possibly, I think he was at Lawrence too. Both of these were engagements. Lawrence is where they joined up with Quantrell's men, and they slaughtered 150 civilians, men and boys. Another action that happened was Centralia, where they executed 24 unarmed Union soldiers. Right above Bloody Bill Anderson is Archie Clement. He was second in command and took over after Bloody Bill Anderson was killed, and he was even known as an executioner. So these guys were actually scalping people, oftentimes. It's very visceral part of our history. The man in the upper right with the brace of pistols, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time he's ever actually been identified or known. That's J.M. Buster Parr. Buster's the moniker they gave him as a name, and he was at least at Centralia, Missouri. The individual right to the right of Bloody Bill Anderson, we're going to figure out who he is, and I haven't gone into this. Every one of these carte de visites is ink signed on the front. And so it's a little bit difficult with the focus and trying to figure out the signature, but we're slowly figuring them out. The gentleman at the bottom right, haven't figured him out either, but we will figure him out. Right to the bottom of Bloody Bill Anderson is Peyton Long. And Peyton Long was responsible for killing the most people at Lawrence, Kansas. To the left of him, in the bottom left, that's Ben Broomfield, who is part Comanche and was most likely at Lawrence and then killed later. And then we move up to the individual right above Ben Broomfield to the left of Bloody Bill Anderson, and that's N.H. Murray. It's Newton Harris Plunk is his nickname, Murray. And the fascinating thing about this piece, it's a half plate tintype. I didn't get into the background of that. And I want you to keep in mind, actually, again, I pointed out the nails in the upper left-hand portion where you're looking at Nathan Carr CDV in the upper left. And there's something because this is interesting, one, just because of the history. Some of the folks are newly identified, and to really know what this is, but we also know who owned this tintype. So Ron, I'm just going to share the screen here. Hopefully this comes out okay. It's going to be hard to read here, and it would be hard to read even in person. But this is the inscription behind the case. It cost $2 to let everybody know. And this will be published in Military Images at a lot more detail, better scans, a lot more focus. But what this reads is, my comrades and friends in arms, part of Company Anderson, N.H. Murray. Now, N.H. Murray is the young man to the left of Bloody Bill Anderson. Show you right here. In this image, he's right there. He had this tintype made. Sorry about that. Had this tintype made of all these carte de visites and had that put together. And most of the individuals in that grouping were killed in action or even executed after they were tried. So the idea that this tintype even exists is really kind of a strange thing, not a strange thing, but really remarkable. Now, we talked about one more thing here. I'll try not to go back and forth with the props. It's good to show in the upper left, those nail holes. When I saw this on eBay, I knew immediately from past experience, I recognized Archie Clement, I knew Bloody Bill Anderson, and I actually recognized the gentleman in the upper left, Nathan Carr. And the reason I recognized it, going back here, is from Larry Jones's calendar, the Confederate calendar from 2000. This is Nathan Carr, and I recognized that image right away. Now, what's absolutely amazing is this is a grouping that was discovered in 1999. Upon close inspection, this is absolutely the same CDV in the tintype. And you can tell by the nail holes.
Wow. Wow.
And it gets even better than that. And that's where this will all be in Military Images. The tintype actually identifies charcoal portraits. Some of these guys who have never been identified before that were done in 1893. Most likely, I think, drawn from the CDVs that were found that were part of this grouping that were copied. Now, one more bit of fun information about N.H. Murray. We can go back to the image. You don't have to look at me anymore. If you go back and look at the tintype, N.H. Murray, the young kid who had this tintype made for $2, he was too young to enlist in the Confederate service. So he ends up joining a guerrilla gang, which, if you're a mother, maybe that's something you want, maybe not. An interesting article was done in 2004 in a Missouri newspaper. N.H. Murray's mother is Malvina. Union soldiers, and this is family lore that was shared in the newspaper, Union soldiers had taken over her house and were butchering her milking cow. And so naturally, what does she decide to do? She decides to poison the Union soldiers. She poisons them. It doesn't work. She gets caught, and N.H. Murray's, Plunk's mom, is going to be executed. They're going to hang her, and she's about to get hung. And one of the soldiers comes up to her and he says, "You're Miss Murray. Are you any relation to Plunk?" And she says, "Well, yes, that's my son." Well, it turns out that Plunk had actually shown that individual mercy and given him water. So they decided not to execute his mother. So it's just fascinating to see this human story of this gruesome part of our history. And then a simple act is giving another soldier a glass of water saves your mother's life. Their log cabin still existed, at least in 2004. And thank you, everybody, for your time.
Wow. Rick, thanks so much. Two very quick observations. One of them, it's interesting to me that both you and Mike selected composite images, both with very, very, very different histories and connections behind them. But like all the images we're seeing tonight, you start to appreciate the stories that they inspire. When you begin to research and find out who they are, the stories begin to come out. And that's one of the favorite parts for me of collecting, is when you start, they become entry points into these stories about the war and about those times. And for me, endlessly fascinating. So thanks so much for sharing this
Thank you.
tintype.
I want to make sure I said also thank you to Charles O'Rear, who helped out a ton with this
Yeah.
research. And if I didn't, I meant to say that during this, but thank you to Charles O'Rear, because without him, I wouldn't know probably less than half of this.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go to Michele Behan. Michele, I feel like is my email buddy. We have such great exchanges around email, and some of the really great images that she's finding that start conversations about who the person might be, and it sends us down some really great rabbit holes. So Michele, I'm grateful to you. I enjoy those conversations so much. And I wanted you to be able to talk a little bit about one of your favorite images, not knowing which one you would select, because in my mind, when I think about all the emails that we've shared, it'd be incredibly hard to pick one. So this is one that want to hear from you and listen to the story. All yours.
Thank you, Ron. I really enjoy our emails as well, and all the help you've given me. You're so good to help me with these mysteries, and that's, I think, the angle that I approach collecting is the mystery angle, and trying to figure out who these people are, or what does that mean in the photo? What does this little detail mean? And that really does it for me. And this particular image, it's an 8th plate tintype. And this image alone has led me on an amazing journey. And I don't think even Ron knows everything about this image that I've discovered. I purchased this in 2018 at an antiques mall. And I've told Ron many times that I am a very strange collector. I find things at antique malls, flea markets, and things like that. As opposed to going to, high-end shows and buying my images. I like to find them in the oddball places. Plus, they're a lot cheaper that way when you find them, where you least expect them. So this was purchased in 2018 at an antiques mall. And the reason I was drawn to the image was the American flag that's in the backdrop. Because for over 10 years, I've been collecting photos with American flags in them. All different kinds of photos up to the early 1900s, including real photo postcards. I just really like how the graphics of the flag seem to pop. Even in purely black and white pictures, it pops with the stars and stripes. And in this image that is tinted so beautifully, it really does pop, because you see the blue and the red colors on the flag. So another thing about this image that really appealed to me, and I'm going to hold this up, but I don't know if anyone's going to be able to see this very well, but there is a name, an ID, partially scratched. Now, I don't know, because the lighting is so weird, it probably won't even show, but there is, let's see if we can get this a little better. Yeah, it's probably not going to show, you have to hold it just a certain way under the light, but there's Samuel, and then B.O. is scratched on the back. So I knew this man's name was Samuel, never knew his surname, didn't know anything really about him, and it sent me on a quest. So I'd been trying to decipher the name for months, showing it to so many people, but nobody could decipher his name. And later in 2018, I brought the photo to the Civil War show in Gettysburg, where I live, and Ron was there with his scanner, and he scanned the photo and later published it in the winter 2019 edition of Military Images magazine. And so it became famous, and I was so happy. And I actually thought maybe someone will know this guy and maybe recognize the name, because Ron even put in his little text that it was Samuel B.O., and we couldn't make out the rest. But, it was just kind of a dead end like that for a while. But then a couple of years later, in 2021, the photo that was published in Military Images caught the attention of John Richter of another magazine called Battlefield Photographer. And John, along with Ron Parisho, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was co-authoring a feature on a relatively unknown Civil War photographer named William Kunstman. He was a painter as well as a photographer, and he used his own painted backdrops for the portraits. And they had done research, identified Kunstman's backdrop, had gone through Military Images online, seeing if they could find a backdrop. And lo and behold, they found my soldier with the Kunstman backdrop. They got my info from Ron and got in touch with me and asked if I would let them use the image in the article they were writing about the photographer. Well, of course, I was thrilled because this was a really good clue that they knew the photographer who took my soldier's image. And the funny thing is it turned out he always used this image that he painted so beautifully. And he also used a cannonball as a prop, which, was very distinctive. If you look by his feet, there's a big old cannonball sitting there. And he had used that in other photos that he had done. But he was so unknown and under the radar that even longtime Pennsylvania photo collectors have never even heard of him. And he's not in photo databases. He's not on online references to photographers, but he was out there and he did his thing. And some of his beautiful tintypes are still floating around. So in the meantime, I was still trying to decipher the photo on the back, and John was trying to help me. And he steered me toward the idea that the man definitely was in an artillery regiment. And because I'm not really good on the military angle of the photos, I just like the artistic nature of them and the mysteries, but I don't know everything about insignia and uniforms and things like that. But he said not only because the cannonball was kind of a clue, but also there was a red color that was faded now, but on the piping of this private sleeves, and that's distinctive to the artillery. And gold tinting was added to his buttons, which I learned from John. I didn't know this, that gold tinting is specific to artillery, and silver buttons are more identified with infantry. So I thought, okay, well, now we've narrowed him down to an artillery regiment. And then another big break came, thanks to Military Images magazine, in the summer of 2021. And I'm going to have to hold this up too. And Military Images published a feature on buglers, and people, you probably recognize this. And in the feature, one of the bugler images was this gentleman. Make sure the light doesn't get on him. And if you notice the backdrop, see the flag there? Now, this was a CDV, not a tintype, but it's the Kunstmann backdrop. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the photographer's backdrop in this photo. So I was so excited that I emailed John immediately and I said, listen, there's another Kunstmann backdrop. It's in the latest issue of Military Images. And he, who subscribes to the magazine, had also seen it and he recognized it too. But the best part was this bugler image with a Kunstmann photographer had an ID to it. It was ID'd to Frederick Ollendorf, and his regiment was also ID'd, the 6th Pennsylvania Heavy Artillery Regiment. So this was really helping me narrow things down. It was indicative proof that William Kunstmann took photos of Pennsylvania soldiers in artillery regiments. So now we had the name of the photographer and we had kind of narrowed down his subject area of photography. And by that time, I was so desperate, not only this guy, but other photos I've acquired. I'm always trying to find out more about them or find their IDs. And so I purchased a subscription to Fold 3 because everyone says, oh, they help you find all this information on military stuff. So on that assumption that my soldier was part of a Pennsylvania artillery regiment with a last name beginning with the letters B and then a little O and then nothing else, I somehow got onto some list and went through every soldier in a Pennsylvania artillery unit and tentatively narrowed him down to Private Samuel Boehler, Boehler, of Company G in the 2nd Pennsylvania Provisional Heavy Artillery. And that particular regiment was sent to the Army of the Potomac as part of the 9th Corps in the spring of 1864 and made some of the first assaults in the siege of Petersburg. So doing with that info, kind of narrowing him down to that, knowing that he was artillery, Samuel, the BO, it all matched. I found, and I'm gonna have to hold this up too, that he was alternately recorded as Samuel Beller. And this is something I printed from the library, Beehler. So not only was he Samuel Boehler, but he was also Samuel Beller. It was the same guy with 2 different spellings of his name. So I thought, oh, that's probably why I've had so much trouble trying to find him, because of the misspelling. And on top of all that, he's not even listed in the Bates Compendium, which they have at my library. And that's a list of all the soldiers that served in the Civil War. And he's not listed under either surname. So it's like, this guy's like just, vanished or something. So, but anyway, finally, knowing that he had Bowler and Beller as his surnames, I found his definitive fate in the U.S. Registers of Deaths of Volunteers. It's very sad. There's a notation of the death of Samuel Beller, B-E-H-L-E-R, not the other one, not the B-O name, but the B-E-H-L-E-R name, of the 2nd PA Provisional Heavy Artillery. And he unfortunately died on July 10th, 1864. I'm going to show this now. Hope this doesn't read backward. He died on July 10th, 1864 at Petersburg, Virginia. So I'm pretty sure that my man, my poor soldier guy, met his fate on the battlefield not too long after this photo was taken, which kind of makes it even more precious to me, thinking that, he gave his life for his country, and he's somewhat forgotten. Even his name's misspelled, and he's not in the Bates Compendium. He barely exists. He's only on a few records. I couldn't find him on any census data, but at least, he lives. He lives in this photo. So that is just really gratifying to me. So that's my story.
Michele, thank you. I love the way you framed it at the end, saying that he lives on through the photograph. And that's moving. That may be the only, other than the papers, that may be the only relic that's left to represent his life. But then again, as you know, there may be a whole cache of things out there belonging to him that are waiting to be found, which is what keeps us going.
Right.
Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing the story. Appreciate it. And this wonderful photograph. All right, now we're going to go to Paul Posa. Paul is the creator and the host of the podcast Untold Civil War. If you have not checked it out and subscribed, I highly recommend it. Wherever you get your podcasts, go and listen to some of the episodes. I believe you'll hear Kurt Luther somewhere in there. Is that right? And me. So with that, I'm going to turn over the floor to Paul.
Well, thank you so much for having me on here. I mean, there's a bunch of legends on this panel, so it's a real privilege for me to be on here. I am wearing a 79th New York bonnet, but it all makes sense. I'm not that crazy because my image is of the 79th New York Highlanders. So this is the regiment that I like to collect. This is the regiment I've been collecting. The reason I like to collect 79th New York images is because, I mean, the image of Scottish Highlanders wearing kilts marching down Broadway, I mean, what's not to like, right? Now, specifically to this image that I'm sharing with you today is the fact that I think it dispels some misconceptions we have, or at least that I've had for a very long time. I've liked to think that the Highlanders went into battle wearing their kilts and maybe carrying claymores and wearing blue face paint, like in the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson. But of course, we do know that this was not the case, not during the Civil War. So we do know that the Highlanders wore their kilts when they were in New York City recruiting. We do know that the Highlanders wore their kilts when they went to the seat of war early in 1861 in Washington. But by the time they marched off to First Manassas, First Bull Run, they pretty much put away the kilts and plaid trousers, which makes a lot of sense if you think about the military today. You know, most soldiers have a fatigue uniform and also have a dress uniform. So, however, you know, we do know from looking at the military, Civil War today, looking at other organizations like law enforcement, or as my aunt says, if you look at a Catholic middle school or high school, people like to personalize their uniforms. So I thought, how did the Highlanders personalize their uniforms throughout the war to show off their Highland flair? Well, in this image, we have a Highlander wearing a Scottish bonnet or a Glengarry. A lot of contemporary sources refer to them as Scotch bonnets. And we know that from newspaper clippings that towards the 1863, I would say, many people wrote home, many Highlanders wrote home requesting bonnets being sent to them from friends and family. And we do know that the Highlanders, when they returned from the war at the end of their term of enlistment, that when they arrived in New York City, that they were greeted by members of the Caledonian Club and other committee members who handed out Scotch bonnets and Glengarries for them to wear as they marched into New York City. So we do know that the Highlanders, perhaps this Highlander, maybe he wore that Glengarry throughout the war, in camp. Maybe he received it in the mail in the middle of the war, or maybe this photo was taken towards the end of the war, right at the end of the war when he marched into New York City. We don't know, but it is an example of how the Highlanders did personalize their uniforms. One of the things I'd like to mention too is that I do have a couple medals from the veterans of the 79th New York. And as you can see, even with their medals, they used plaid or tartan ribbon to sort of make them stand out among other veterans. So it shows that these guys, they may have not been born in Scotland, they may not be of Scottish birth, but they definitely did want to show off their Scottish nom de guerre. They were very proud of it. And so I think this image is a great highlight of that personalization that we see in their uniform. And even though they weren't like Mel Gibson and Braveheart, there's something to be recognized and appreciated in the small personalizations in these uniforms.
Terrific. I think it's really important. You've highlighted some details here, particularly how these images can help set the record straight, because we've all seen engravings of the Highlanders with their kilts on, and the suggestion is they went into battle with them. But you've got an image that tells a little bit of a different story, and yet they still managed to personalize. And one of the strengths of Civil War photography is because it was the first war that was systematically photographed, you really get to see the enlisted man, the company officers, the non-commissioned officers, and get a sense for their individualism. And so here's a perfect example of that. So
absolutely. And one thing I can add too is that the tartan that was shipped all the way from Scotland was very expensive. So, for these guys, it probably made a lot more sense to wear those sky blue trousers in the field, which could be easily replaced than, that good Scottish stuff that was being shipped over from Scotland. So
save the good stuff for after hours.
Right, exactly.
All right, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Wonderful image. And now we're going to move on to Ron Field. Ron is a prolific researcher, writer, author of too many books for me to list. we take a long time to go through all of that. He has been such a great friend and a contributor to the magazine, and he's one of our senior editors. So, Ron, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Ron. Well, I acquired this favorite image quite recently, and when I encountered it on the website, I instantly recognized what it was because of the engineer's castle on the collar. It was actually advertised as possibly an engineer officer, but it immediately struck me this was a member of the United States Zouave Cadets, possibly when they were still the National Guard Cadets before Ellsworth put them in full Zouave mode. This guy has been driving me crazy, actually. I kind of am happy with the ID I have on him, but it doesn't add up in the photograph, and this is what I wanted to talk about. He's wearing the full dress that was acquired via Elm Ellsworth for the National Guard Cadets, and then it was taken on by the Zouave Cadets as their full dress uniform. But the odd thing about it is he's got officers' shoulder straps. I can only take that's what they are. But he's cannily, he's left his coat open to show off his moire shirt, which was a pale blue with orange embroidery on it, which was worn by the Zouave cadets as part of their Zouave uniform. And I find this really quite strange, because if he was an officer, I'm not quite sure why he would be wearing an enlisted ordinary sort of cadet's shirt underneath that, but he's deliberately exposing the fact that he's got that shirt on. Now, then I immediately thought about a project I had in mind for Military Images, which relates to the postal cover. If we can show that, Ron, now. Yeah. And my idea was that I wanted to ID these guys of the United States Zouave cadets and write an article about them. So I was kind of thinking, I've seen the guy in the CDV somewhere before, obviously, you know, as Zouave cadet, but it then dawned on me, if we can show the next slide, Ron, that I'd seen him in this, or rather the postal cover is based on this photograph by Jeremiah Gurney, which was taken when the Zouave cadets reached New York. They just completed their drill display in City Hall. And then they obviously called in on Jeremiah Gurney's photo studio, and this group image was produced. And the fascinating thing for me is that the individuals along the bottom there are named, and I'm sure that I'd seen the guy in my CDV before, and I looked closely at the man who's second from right in the image. Can we show the CDV next that Dan Miller has, Ron? Yeah, okay. This is a cropped version of the original CDV that Zouave collector Dan Miller has in his collection. And now I'm looking again at the man second from right, and I have become convinced that the man in my CDV is Henry S. Wade. Now, Henry S. Wade was one of the Zouave cadets that took part in the drill tour of goodness knows how many cities. This shows him wearing an enlisted private Zouave cadets uniform along with the other four guys. And you can see they're all wearing this moire shirt, very decorative shirt, underneath their Zouave jackets and the rest of the uniform. And so I'm still trying to find out. It is, you know, one of these projects that it's become a favorite project because I can't get to the bottom of it, because Henry S. Wade certainly was in the Zouave cadets. I can't find anything about him before this. And the only thing I can find afterwards is that he had died by, I think it was 1865. Yeah, by 1865, he was announced to have passed away at one of the Zouave cadet reunions. Now, the theory I have about this is that as he is clearly seen as an enlisted Zouave cadet in this group shot, he must, if my theory is right, that he's wearing an officer's coat for the Zouave cadets in the CDV, he must have been promoted or been elected to first or second lieutenant after the drill tour, because when the Zouave cadets arrived back in Chicago, shortly after that, by February, Ellsworth had left to take up more of a political career and to become part of Lincoln's entourage and so And so my kind of creeping theory is that Henry S. Wade was elected as one of the officers when a reshuffle, a reorganization took place of the Zouave Cadets. A lot of people think that they didn't exist after Ellsworth left, but they carried on. I just yesterday found a list of those members who carried the unit on and carried on with the drill and the discipline and in the gymnastics and so on that they performed as part of the whole deal. If we can go back to the original, oh no, you've got one more, I think, haven't you, Ron? You've got one more. Yeah, this consolidates my theory that Henry S. Wade was an enlisted man in the company. He's wearing the full dress here again. You can just make out, well, you can make out the engineer's castle on his cap and on his collar. But then if we go back to my favorite image, Ron, then you can see he's wearing the officer's uniform. So there must be a further story here that I have yet to unravel. But this is the thing about the collecting and the research that goes into what you actually get your hands on, it's a story which continues to unfold. But I go back to the original excitement I had when I realized fairly for sure that this is the man who is second from right in the group photograph that Gurney took. So I present to you Henry S. Wade, but it's a story which is still unfolding as research goes on. So that's my story, and I hope people have become as intrigued in the man as I am, because it's still yet to be told.
Well, Ron, thank you so much. I know with your consummate research abilities, and now with everyone on CivilWarTalk and others who would be able to watch this archived version and military images, we might be able to pitch in. I will also add that listening to Ron's presentation, you can now understand why I badger Ron fairly often with images saying, what is this guy wearing? What can you tell me about this? And Ron will provide a wealth of detail. Thank you so much, especially for everything else and for staying up for this late hour in UK time. So thank you.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, yes, of course. Now we're going to go to Kurt Luther. Kurt, I first met about 2014, 2015. Most of you, I think, know him as the founder, the creator of Civil War Photo Sleuth, which has revolutionized identifying images. Civil War Photo Sleuth uses face recognition technology and community to rediscover the lost identities of Civil War era photographs. But I think it's easy to forget that Kurt is also a collector. And so I wanted him to come on tonight, not to talk about Civil War Sleuth, though you may very well mention it, but I wanted Kurt to talk about an image in his own collection. So it's all yours, Kurt.
Thanks, Ron. So what I'd like to talk about today, as you can see, is a CDV. And when I came across this CDV, it was unidentified. And you can tell right away that this is going to be a tough one to identify, because he's, it's a Union junior officer. He's got very few clues available here. We don't have any hat brass with the regimental numerals. We have, a sword, looks like an infantry foot officer's sword. We can't even see his shoulder straps, maybe a captain, maybe a lieutenant. He does have the black hat, which may indicate a Western unit, but can't say for sure. And if you look at the back of the photo, you'll see a Washington, D.C. backmark, which is pretty generic and doesn't offer us a lot of clues. so many soldiers went through DC. No tax stamp either to help date the image. But he does have a unique face, and that turns out to be pretty helpful. So luckily, and I'm already contradicting Ron by mentioning Civil War photos. Luckily, I was able to use this this website, which is freely available, and I hope that you'll all use it as well, to identify this photo. I was able to find an exact match of this photograph in a historical society collection. And that's one of the reasons I love this image, but I also love the story behind it. So let me tell you a little bit about this man. His name is Captain Joseph Perriam, and he is captain of Company K, 1st Minnesota Infantry. And the story I'm going to tell is a lot of it's coming from research done by Wayne Jorgensen and from his regimental history on the 1st Minnesota, which I encourage you to check out. So before the war, Joseph Perriam lived in Winona, Minnesota. He was a real estate investor. Apparently, he was one of the richest men in town. I don't know how he pulled it off because he was only about 30 years old, but he did. And even though Minnesota was just a few years a state in the Union, he was very patriotic. And so when the war broke out, he enlisted in April '61, first as a second lieutenant in Company K. And as many of you know, 1st Minnesota was a hard-fought regiment in many of the battles of the Eastern Theater, Bull Run, Antietam, Fredericksburg. So throughout this, he's participating in these battles. He's promoted to 1st lieutenant in November of '61, and then he gets the captaincy of the company in September 1862, when the previous captain is killed at Antietam. So if you know about the 1st Minnesota, you know that their most famous action is, of course, at Gettysburg, specifically the second day of Gettysburg, July 2nd. At that time, they only had 262 men in the field, and there was a hole opened up in the Union line, and an Alabama brigade, Wilcox's brigade, moved into that hole, and Winfield Scott Hancock gallops up and says, well, he needs somebody to fill that hole, and he sees this 1st Minnesota, and he says, my God, is this all the men that we have? What regiment is this? The colonel says it's the 1st Minnesota. So Hancock orders them to charge those lines, and they were gravely outnumbered. Some say 6-1, but they knew what they were doing and they did it anyway. They held off the attack for about 15 minutes until reinforcements arrived. And even in those 15 long minutes, 215 of the 262 men fell. That was 82% of the regiment, largest of any U.S. regiment in a single day. And Captain Perriam, unfortunately, was one of them. So he fell just before the colonel of the 1st Minnesota ordered a bayonet charge. He was shot in the head. And we have period documentation of some of those events. The first sergeant of his company wrote that I was laying by my captain, who was wounded in the head, the ball entering at the nose and came out back of the left ear. In taking care of him, I got pretty well covered in blood, as he bled a good deal. He wanted to go back to the front, so I had to hold him most of the time. So an ambulance eventually came, took him to the rear, and he lived for a few more days. Another period account says that he spent his last few days in a semi-conscious delirium, ordering his men to stand and asking about the outcome of the battle. And of course, the outcome was a Union victory. And historians say that this countercharge of the 1st Minnesota helped to win the battle and ultimately save the Union. So he died a couple of days later on July 6th. He's buried at Gettysburg National Cemetery. I've brought this photo to the cemetery to kind of reunite it with the gravesite. And amazingly, there's one more part of the story where he actually wrote a letter in May of '61, just a month or so after he joined the unit. And he wrote about his premonition of death. He said, quote, I'm fully content that I shall never return from this war, and I'm entering the lists with this conviction fully impressed upon my mind, I am indeed proud of the privilege afforded to me of offering up my life in defense of my beloved country. And now, of course, we are able to give a name to his face. And I just love that this image that was pretty anonymous, we were able to give him a name and to learn about the story of his sacrifice. I also love this image because it was the first image that I had published in Military Images magazine. I sent it to Ron for the Stragglers part of the magazine many years ago, and it was published. And since then, I've had the privilege to write the photo sleuth column in the magazine and have a bunch more images in. But this was the very first one, and it's been fun to share it with you.
Thanks, Kurt. Listening to you tell his story reminds me of the power that these images have to reveal stories of courage and stories of heroism. Makes me think about his comrades in arms, the soldier who was with him as he was bleeding on the battlefield. It makes me imagine what his family and friends back in Winona, what they went through when they found out, and maybe it makes me appreciate that he was able to find out what happened. I like to think that he found out the outcome of the battle. It makes me reflect on my own conduct too, as an American. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Our last speaker tonight is Kevin Canberg. Kevin has been very involved with the magazine for some years now. He's a senior editor. He's also recently connected with the Daguerrean Society, and is helping those guys out, doing some great things there. So, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kevin, and tell us about what you've got here.
Well, first, thank you so much for the invite, and it's a real honor to be here. It's been quite an experience to listen to the folks that came before me in this presentation and hear their interpretation of what they love as a favorite image. So as just a kind of a person who's watching along, this has been exciting. So thank you to all you guys. And in any event, I've been collecting for about 16 years. And I'm as interested in the art of early photography as the history that it helps us understand. And so I don't necessarily focus from a collecting perspective on a particular regiment or particular accoutrements or anything like that. I do focus on great photos. 19th century photographers held themselves out as artists. They often printed it on their material or on the back of a carte de visite. But I don't think they've really gotten their due necessarily. So my dream state one day is that the broader art community, I guess you could say, begins to recognize historic photographers as they do the work of modern photographers. I do think that shift has begun, but I think there's more work to do. But in any event, when I'm considering what to add to the collection, I look for a connection. I look for a superlative example of a photograph that tells a story. And when I see one, I try to go after it as hard as I can within my means. I'm fortunate to have a lot of images that are maybe more exciting, maybe with a little more firepower, but I'm not sure I've encountered an image quite like the one I chose as my favorite for this presentation, for the reason that these folks in these pictures were literally communicating through photographs, quite literally. So the soldier in this photo here, which is a 6-plate tintype, is a gentleman named Samuel Harmon, and he was a member of the 82nd Indiana Infantry. He was born in 1831 in Kentucky. So he's about 31 years old in this picture, which is a little on the older side for the average Union private. He was a farmer before the war. He lived in Columbia, Indiana, with his wife, Mary. And by all accounts, they were common people. They scratched an existence from the soil. It would be really fair to call Samuel a true citizen soldier. The image itself is in mint condition. It's got great clarity. but it's also really simple. Harmon is the star of this image. He's not armed at all. He's not wearing a unique uniform, but the clarity of this image is such that it lets you really experience him in a way. The dirt on his coat, you can see how it's torn and frayed, especially by the underarms where there are holes that you can see. His dirty hands and even the strands of his kind of scraggly beard. It's a pretty intimate portrait. But what makes this image really special to me and puts it sort of into a favorite category is that he isn't holding a gun or a knife or anything that the typical things that we look for in an exciting Civil War photo. He's actually just holding a picture. And what makes it a favorite is that I also happen to be in possession of the picture that he's holding in this tintype. So who is in the picture that he's holding for the camera? That would be his wife, Mary, and cradled in her arm is their daughter, Indiana. So Indiana was their second child. She was born several months after Samuel left for war in 1862. So what this all means, if you kind of are doing the math, is that this photograph that he's holding up in the picture was likely the first time he ever saw his daughter. She went to a photographer, had the picture made, and mailed it to her husband, who was out at the front or in camp, so he could meet her. He received it, obviously was moved, and took a trip to a photographer that was local to wherever he was stationed, wherever he was, and essentially took a proof of life photo. So you can imagine what he felt. He had at this point already been through battles like Perryville and Stones River. And he likely carried this photo for the rest of the war. 3 more years of virtually nonstop action: Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Missionary Ridge, Atlanta, the March to the Sea with Sherman. So no wonder that secondary picture now looks a little worn that I have that was in the photo in this time, because it was there. How many times did he look at it? One of my favorite indulgences in the last 16 years of collecting is to take this image off the shelf and hold it in the same way he does. He has the image in his right hand, and it rests against his jacket where it's sort of folded as he was seated at the photographer's stool or chair. I think there's a phrase or a concept out there of like a period rush, right? Where you kind of connect with, that time period. And that's kind of what you get. So I don't know if you can see this well with the light situation, but this is the photo that he's holding. And to be the kind of the caretaker of this photo, when you look at the photo of him holding it, is a powerful experience. As a collector, I'm not sure I've ever had a closer connection to somebody that I've researched or studied, or a photograph that I've had. So it's a real honor to care for it. Just a little postscript before I wrap up. What happened to them? Well, Samuel survived. He went back to farming. He was wounded during the war and eventually drew an invalid pension when his body gave out. That was about 1890. Mary passed away in 1899. And when that happened, Samuel went to Missouri to live with one of his sons, or one of their sons, I should say. He eventually died, and I believe it was 1912. The baby in the picture, Indiana, wound up living till 1929. She was killed in a car accident. And that sort of ends the story of the folks that are in these photos. But incredibly difficult assignment to pick a favorite. It's like picking a favorite child. But I hope you enjoyed.
Kevin, thank you so much. The story behind this reveals what I think is oftentimes it's an interesting tension, the intimacy of these photographs against the backdrop of a devastating war that engulfed the country, a very, very big war that we often think in broad terms. We paint it in broad brushes, and yet here we have 2 individuals who were separated by that war, and they chose to communicate through photographs. It's that tension there that I think is there's a beauty to that, and an artistic angle to it that I think gets back to some of what you were saying earlier. And so I also agree with you. I think that these images are, after being hidden away for so long, and most of that being intentional, these were personal images, personal family photographs that were not intended to be on a Zoom program, probably. And yet here they are, and here we're talking about them, and they are moving into public collections and getting attention. I think for many of the reasons that the collectors like you and everyone else here gathered here feels that power of connection to them as part of an individual story and part of a much larger story. And so I really thank you. And I want to thank everyone, all of the collectors, for taking time to prepare, make those hard choices, choose a child, if you will, and to spend some time tonight talking. So thank you so much, everyone. And also thank you to everyone who participated. I see almost everyone hung out through this program, which probably went a little longer, but I couldn't help, longer than I anticipated, but I couldn't help it. Just loved listening to the stories. And so I hope you did too. Laura, back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ron. That was great. Wasn't it? Those were some fantastic images, but you know how I love those stories. That was amazing. So we've got a few questions in the chat log, and I'm just going to read those for y'all. And if the tech team can bring the collector to the screen, that'd be great. Let's see. So the first, sorry, there's a lot of questions. I'm having to scroll through to get to it. Let's see. So the first question is from Tina, and she said, this is a great question. All of you guys have, and ladies, have museum quality images. How does a beginner start with collecting Civil War images, but obviously can't start with the high bar of the top images in the US? So some advice. Who would you want us to pick to bring to the... Kevin actually answered it in the chat box, but can we see what some other folks might have to say?
Sure.
Kevin, I'm gonna bring you.
Who wants to volunteer?
Yeah, I'm gonna bring Kevin to the screen because I liked his answer, but anybody else, let's bring Mr. Field. He's probably got some advice. What do you guys say to someone who, a brand new collector, they don't have museum quality images? How does the beginner get started?
Well, I kind of just followed my instincts. With I was attracted to what I saw. Felt I wanted to know more. You have to start small. You have to start with, well, dare I say, CDVs. They often tend to come a bit cheaper than the hard case images. I started with hard case images basically, but then realized the worth of CDVs. It's just a case of you just follow your instincts, follow the wind, and it will take you in the right direction. It's just a journey. I'm still on it, and I'm amazed at what I discover as I travel. And I'm sure that that's the way others think about it too, really. It's just a fantastic journey. And you never know what's around the corner. You never know what you're going to discover next, and what story and what rabbit hole that takes you down.
I love that, because I'm a rabbit hole chaser myself. So Kevin, what do you have to add? You gave some good advice in the chat, but if you'll just kind of repeat that, because some people may not have read it.
Sure. So I'll try to paraphrase. And I probably started collecting in my early mid-20s, something like that. And at the time, like, it amazed me that you could buy a Civil War photograph. Like, I was just totally out of my realm of understanding. And then what I quickly realized is that once you start to look for them, they're kind of everywhere. And so to sort of take the pressure off your wallet and take the pressure off your mind, I recommend is you learn as much about Civil War photography and kind of develop a taste for what interests you about Civil War photography, before you set off buying Civil War photography. And I think that's a good way to kind of be patient, take your time, and try to get the best examples that you can of what you like. I know the horse trading is always fun, and sometimes you got to buy something, but at the same time.
And that's a great answer that you just gave, because it's so different from what Mr. Field just said, because he said, just follow your intuition. Like if you feel good about it and it feels right and you want it and it draws you, then buy it. And you just said, be patient, find what you like, a very methodical process. So how do you reconcile those two options?
Because I was a lunatic when I started, and I was spending way too much money because it's just like everything's cool. Like, wow, this great, this one's great, that one's great, and it can get unruly in a hurry. If you have unlimited funds, then hey, God bless, knock yourself out. But I think it does help to kind of to ground yourself in something that of interest, and try to not necessarily focus, but try to get the best you can of what you're interested in.
Excellent advice. Okay, I brought Mr. Fleischer to the screen too, so let's see what he has to say about it. If you don't mind, Mr. Fleischer, we'll get your.
Well, from my company, of course. I own a company that sells Civil War antiques. But no, I think eBay, local estate sales, there are large shows held every year in places like Gettysburg and Nashville, Tennessee. So those are all excellent places, not only to acquire new images, but also to connect with other collectors and to learn more about images and photography.
Okay, thanks so much. And what about this isn't one of the questions from the box, but I'm gonna ask Ron to address it. What about the reproductions, how do you avoid purchasing a fake?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question, Laura. The market for fakes has existed in some way, shape, or form for many years. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional. The best ways that I know, one thing I can say for sure is accept the fact that you're going to make a mistake. I bought my first fake image, I think when I was in my late teens or early 20s, and I knew something was wrong with it, but it was also so darn good looking that I was like, I gotta have this. I reacted more with my heart than my brain, but it was a teachable moment. I understood after I looked into it and realized what I had. I learned a lot from that. And so it's okay to make a mistake. Making mistakes, whatever you do in life, you're going to make mistakes. It's what happens next. If you learn from that mistake, then more power to you. The community of collectors is a wonderful group to be able to connect with, to be able to learn more about distinguishing what's fake and what's real. Going to the shows or going to your local antique shop, visiting your friends who are collectors, to be able to physically handle the images. It's great when you're on Zoom or on social media or in Military Images magazine, you're seeing the photographs, but having the experience of actually handling them contributes to that body of knowledge. So when you see something that's fake, your radar will go off and tell you that something isn't quite right. I use the term radar because it's one that Perry Froney uses. He authors a column for us about fakes. And I think that's another good source to get yourself some information. Ron is holding up what is, I believe, is a fake that he bought at some point. So,
oh my gosh! If Mr. Field bought a fake, then I guess we can all assume that it's going to happen to us. I'm not good at failing, so
a good one though. It was a good one.
So I brought Michele to the screen also because she was holding her hand. So I think she has a story for us too. So go ahead, Michele.
Yes, I was going to tell that person who asked about where do I get started. You don't have to necessarily start with soldiers. Soldiers are going to be more expensive. Military images are going to be more expensive, but you can get civilian photos from the Civil War era, like women in their fashions or children. Those are still very reasonable. You can go to antique stores and find a lot of CDV or tintype images of people in the Civil War era, not necessarily in the military uniform. And you can start out that way with whatever draws you and attracts you. And you learn more about photos that way. And then I just luck out. Sometimes I go to antique malls and things and I just, find a photo. Like I found a Confederate, Ron knows this story. I found a Confederate Tennessee soldier in a St. Louis antique mall. And it was just strange, but apparently the dealer had bought it in the state or something and just, slapped $150 on it or whatever. And, I thought, oh, I got to get this guy. He's a Confederate. I've got to get him. So, you do find these unexpected, exciting finds. But yeah, just get any kind of, Civil War era photo, not necessarily the soldier first that draws you. There's a lot of different avenues. Even people with pets, that's a big thing. People with pets in the 1860s. There's some really nice photos of those too.
Yeah, sometimes things just go your way, it happens sometimes.
Yep.
Great advice.
Rick, do
sure.
you have some advice for our new collectors?
Yes, I'm going to just kind of reiterate Michelle's advice. If I were to do this again, to start over, I would really focus on the civilian photography. There is so much, and it's not a business. I mean, I do buy and sell as a hobby to get more material generally. The civilian area, you have so much less competition. There's so much more that's out there. The margins are so higher. And it's absolutely wonderful material. I mean, just yesterday, I bought a Buy It Now CDV, I Like Indiana material of a photographer. It's one of the earliest images I've seen by this photographer. It had a pencil ID. I bought it anyway because it was very reasonable. And the gentleman, Dr. Dunlap, Livingston Dunlap, was actually one of the first people to actually get a hospital started in Indiana. And it's very important to Indiana history. And I got it for all in, I think, $16. And it's just absolutely amazing American history. One note that I'll chime in with the fakes, I suggest highly to go to the shows, meet a lot of different people and get a lot of different opinions, and absolutely do not do anything with social media. The social media forums are wrong so often. I can tell you a story with one of the gentlemen that's on the panel tonight, where an image that is very important, one of probably 20 known, was called a fake by a I won't get into this, but absolutely wrong. Could have destroyed the value of the image, destroyed the whole perception. And if the seller listened to that person, would have lost thousands. And I've actually had to go and buy an image on purpose to prove to some people that they were wrong and then show it on social media just so that the image wasn't killed. So anyway, my rule, don't listen to anybody on social media. Sorry, I'm passionate about it. And know a lot of people because you're gonna get differentiating opinions on the fakes. And a lot of that, especially when you get into the regionality of images, they're so nuanced. I mean, some of the tinting that you see out of Tennessee, people will think it's fake because it's just kind of could be flat or they use a lot more colors than you would normally see. And you'll have people poo-poo that image and throw away thousands of dollars. They don't know what they're talking about.
Amazing.
Anyway, don't use social media for the sounding board. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
My 2 cents.
Good advice. I brought Mr. Huston to the screen. The next question is actually for you.
Okay.
Someone asked, or someone commented that they just passed on the transcription of the Stewart letter on Battle of Liberty Gap to John Banks for possible use in Civil War times. Stay tuned, which isn't that fantastic? And then someone asked, are the folks in the image, are all of them identified, and how did that work? Explain that, how that composite.
Great questions. And so first I have to give a shout out to Griff. So William Griffing, who's on here. Griff has a group called Spared and Shared. And Griff actually did the design work for the header on a Facebook group that I started called Iowa Civil War Images, did an awesome job. So, and he did that for me, just out of the, thanks a bunch to Griff. What he's referencing is some letters So back to and this kind of ties into the whole composite story and I guess into collecting in general. I purchased a group of 87 Civil War letters about 2 years ago. Well, it actually was about a year ago. And I was able to sell those letters as groups by unit. And in some cases, I was able to reunite those letters with images of some of the authors of the letters, which was awesome. I love the letters. I love collecting them. But I had an opportunity to buy this composite. And so I had to make a decision, you know, I'm going to have to sell these letters to afford to be able to buy the composite. So back to Tina's question, sometimes you have to collect to feed the collection. I think Ron's even mentioned that before. So that's kind of what I had to do in this situation. But it's great to see that those letters, they made it to the right place. They made it into the right hands. And I would say, as I've dealt with some of the images that I've sold, it's kind of worked out that way. They seem to find the right place. They seem to get to the right spot. So in regards to the composite, are they all identified? They are. When John W. Morton put this composite together, there's a key at the bottom, or like an index at the bottom that has a number, and then each one of the images is numbered. So all of the images in the composite are numbered. The 33 CDV images that are on the outside, that number correlates to the same gentleman or the same soldier who's post-war and composite itself. So yeah, they are all identified. Did I answer all the questions? I think
You did. Thank you so much.
Yep, you bet. Thank you.
It's a fantastic composite, and thanks for bringing it and showing it to us.
I want
Thanks
to
for having
follow.
me.
I want to follow up on something that Mike said, talking about how images and letters and other artifacts find their way into the hands of people who can make something of them and help them find their way to someplace else. It reminds me that we are all ultimately caretakers is the word that often comes to mind to describe what we do. I think a lot of it is by instinct, as Ron Field says, sort of following the wind. You're just in it and you find these images, they find you, and you become a caretaker. Another term that I've heard used by Rich Jan, who was one of our senior editors, is we're keepers of history. That's what we do. So just want to throw that out there.
Thank you so much, Mike. Let's see. The next question is just it's not about an image, but someone asked Adam if his middle name, I suppose, is any relation to the New York Oach family. Adam, do you want to comment on that, or do you prefer to keep that a private?
No, they are distant cousins of mine, and it actually has an interesting Civil War connection. So my 3 times great-grandfather was a guy named Julius Ox, and he was a Civil War officer during the Civil War, or it was an officer during the Civil War. And his son was the person who purchased the New York Times.
Oh, great. Okay. So I mispronounced it. Pronounce it again for me, but that's okay because I mispronounced Michelle's name earlier and then I couldn't figure out how to say it. So it's Behan.
Ox, O-X.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. So that's the Ox family that purchased the New York Times. Very interesting. Let's see. So Adam, while I've got you on the screen, folks said that the subject on the left is incredible. The man with the finger on his temple.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. People said how comfortable he seems in front of the camera and all those kind of things. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
No problem. And I did see that someone asked, was he identified? And unfortunately, he's not.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe one day. And, you know, it was funny, when I first saw the images, I thought that he bore a resemblance to Frederick Douglass. So much so that I ended up looking up Frederick Douglass's sons to see if by chance they were, you know, there's any connection. But I think the resemblance kind of ended at the facial hair. He looked like Frederick Douglass in that way, but really in no other way. So,
right.
No, but maybe one day we'll put a name to the face.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about the Photo Sleuth platform is nobody ever thought that would exist and that we would be able to identify images that way. So if that's there now, then, you know, the more images that are added, the more likely it is that eventually one day we'll be able to identify people. Fantastic platform.
Absolutely.
Thanks. I am going to bring David to the screen if I can find him, because this is my personal question. David, I'm going to bring you to the screen, so I'm going to need you to start your video if you're still with us. Oh, there he is. So this is my question, and it is about the image that you showed. You said that you have the subject's brother. Also, you bought the two. Did you buy? Were those? You never said. Were those the two images that the antique dealer had at the same time, or were those? Did you buy one time and one another? Good question. Those actually came out of the family at the same time. Fun story. It was, and these are the way these things sometimes will break out of a family. The husband sold these images that belonged to his wife, and he pulled them out of a trunk and sold them to a gun dealer. He didn't sell them for a lot of money, and they changed hands to the antique dealer. And so when I went back and asked, just to try to get a little bit of additional information about them, her husband said, "Oh, and there's a trunk full of letters and memorabilia." And so at that point, she had pulled back. This is now 10 or 12 years that I have stopped by occasionally on my way home from Athens back to Atlanta and just say, "Hey, now I was just passing by. Can you get to those letters?" But they're very distrusting because, he basically sold this image out without her permission. And, I'd love to get to the letters. I'm sure there's some, incredible information there, but that's the way a lot of these things go. Sometimes you go as far as you can, you hit a dead end, but as a collector, you keep hoping that one day the avenue is going to open up and you're going to be successful. But the two images came together, and it was really incredible that, that was just one of those big scores for as far as a collector goes. The ones that you really never forget. There's just a handful of those I've been doing this over 30 years. And Tig Anderson. Most of the time, Tig Anderson. Tig Anderson. Absolutely. That was another one. And that was one that a CDV of Tig Anderson, an unpublished view that I acquired from an antique dealer. And then with some help of some other people, actually reached out to several people, and then we were able to figure out that it was Tig Anderson, and he had different facial hair, which made it a little bit hard to identify at the very beginning. We were looking for identical photos, and this was one that hadn't been published. So, yeah. Well, fantastic story. And those guys are one's from the 13th and one's from the 16th Georgia Cavalry. They're actually both from the 16th. They reorganized and became the 13th Georgia Cavalry. And the men never went by the 13th. Even later in the war, when they're serving under the 13th Georgia Regiment, they refer to themselves as the 16th Georgia. So a lot of those guys, even though they were reorganized into a different regiment number, they affiliated with the 16th. So they were actually still in the same regiment. Gotcha. They sent a lot of letters home at the beginning of the war, I guess. You probably already. Yep, those are the ones I'm working on. I haven't seen them yet. Oh, you haven't? I could probably help you. Those are the ones that are in the trunk. Oh no, I mean these are ones that were published in the, ones that were published in the newspaper. There was quite a number of them that were sent back and published in the newspaper. I'll find some of them and send them to you. I'd love to see those. Yeah. Let's see, Rick Brown. Thank you so much, David. You're welcome. Let's see, where is Rick? We have a question about the composite. Let's see if I can somebody find Rick? And there he is. Rick, we have a question about the composite. Quite a composite. Glad to hear you describe these Missouri guerrillas as you did murderers. And wow, what a story. And then that's just an absolutely amazing image. Can you tell us, I know you told us that you recognize Bill Anderson in the center and a couple of the other guys. It was difficult, I guess, for us watching to see how we couldn't really see a lot of the detail. So you bought it online. So just tell us the process. You saw it, you immediately recognized it as Bill Anderson?
Yeah. So backstory. We had 5 minutes, so thanks for asking the question because I really did want to share this. I saw this. It was on eBay, and it was listed as just daguerreotype of men. That was the description. And, you know, when you look at it, it's fairly unattractive. It's not a really pretty piece when you first look at it. And so, you know, it kind of looks dirty. In fact, I still haven't cleaned the cover glass because to me, it's still so visceral. This is probably as close as I can get to, you know, being in, I don't know, shaking hand, however you would engage with the Bloody Bill Anderson member, which I think they would all be quite scary. When you look at it, it's a visceral experience. I mean, it's Phil McCoy. I showed this to one of my good friends, and when he held it, he looked at me. He's like, "Can you imagine how many people these guys killed?" And it's true. I mean, you look that guy Peyton Long. None of those guys you would really probably want to meet in a dark alley or on a bright sunny day. So how it happened, I saw it on eBay. It was sitting there at nothing for most of the week, and I put in a very strong bid right at the end, and full knowing that really all it took was one heavy hitter, and I shouldn't have gotten this image, just not at all. I think very highly of it. You all can probably tell that. I was in the back parking lot behind my house, pressing the button, you know, within the final seconds to bid on it. When I won this item, I literally jumped. I mean, jumped and yelled at the top of my lungs, so I can't believe I actually got it. And then more fun, there is a Facebook page which has market value, but it causes problems. They basically post auction results. And eBay, as a lot of people may know, does not enforce compliance to actually sell items that people win. I've had a number of items that I don't actually get because the sellers decide not to give it to me. And so immediately after I won this, they posted it on that site. And I knew it was going to happen. And I'm just praying the seller actually sells this, sends it to me. There was tracking, but I could see that the post office didn't have possession. And so people on this Facebook page started chiming in, actually making fun of it. Quite a few Daguerrean collectors said, you know, this is garbage. What an idiot. Nobody should buy this thing. I'm paraphrasing. They didn't exactly say those words, but it was the attitude. And then Wes Cowan chimed in, and he's like, that's Bloody Bill Anderson and some other people. And then I'm just freaking out even more because the post office doesn't have possession of this thing yet. And so it's a Friday, and I keep refreshing my phone as quickly as just hoping. And eventually the post office had possession in St. Louis. And I screamed at the top of my lungs, called Ron, had a couple Guinness. Joe Maggie, I'm thinking of you too. Murray actually could be an Irish name. It could be Scottish too. So we're thinking of you. Had a bunch of Guinness, was super excited about the image. And then when I got it in, they gave the dimensions, and the dimensions actually were basically a quarter plate. When it came in, it was a half plate. And I asked the seller, I said, hey, you know, did you get this in your travels, or is it a family piece? And she came back and said, you know, that's on my granddaddy's side. You know, I don't know where he picked it up. And it came right out of the area of Missouri of where he's from. So I actually do tend to think this came right from the family. They didn't know that their ancestor fought with Bloody Bill Anderson.
Wow.
I just wanted to comment on one of those things that you just mentioned. And it's something that I think a lot of novice collectors don't really think of. And the only reason that I think of it is because it's not that because I'm an experienced Civil War image collector at all. Ron can attest, but is that, I mean, my parents took us to auctions when we were kids. I remember falling asleep in the chairs, you know, they'd had those old theater seats, and me and my sister would curl up and around the arm of the thing and sleep till the auction ended at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then our parents would carry us to the car. And so, I mean, we've been going to auctions since we were little, but I mean, with all these online auctions and stuff, you don't know if you can't say, oh my gosh, I mean, don't send an email to the guy you bought it from and go, oh yeah, I bought it because it's Bloody Bill Anderson and all the guys, and they're all identified now, because then he doesn't have to send it to you. I mean, I think people forget that there's nothing that makes him have to send you that after you tell him what it was. So he may not. especially if you go tell him it's Bloody Bill Anderson and the whole gang, you know.
Yeah, this one, it's kind of strange. I completely agree. You know, I've lost images, and we all on the call here have competitors, you know, and this one I did lay the line in the sand, and I claimed it on Facebook that I bought it without being really pushy on this one. This one I would have brought in legal action. It wouldn't have been to go after the family, nothing like that. I would never do that. But if it ended up in another collector's hands, I would actually bring in legal action, show the eBay results. Because I have had one of the conversations with a lawyer before for this kind of an instance. You're really not going to have any success actually having the family do anything or having the person sell it to you. But there is something to say about, and this I'm repeating what I heard, that you can still have the right to buy it. And so you can actually have that documented. But it's that didn't happen. So this is more of a fun conversation.
Good. That's
And,
good. I'm glad it didn't happen, and I'm glad you got
everything
the image,
down
and it's
to the
fascinating. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. It was great to see it, and I appreciate you showing it to us. I am going to bring, where am I? Rick. No, we just talked to Rick. Let's see. I had the next one picked out. Let's say, oh, it was for Michelle's image.
Okay.
So Michele, I'm going to bring you to down here with us if I can get somebody to bring Michele down, or I can. Folks really love your image, and I do too. The flag, of course, you mentioned the flag and how it pops. How great the contrast is with the flag there against the mostly black and white. And folks said it's interesting and well done, and the guy looks fierce. I love his beard, the flag, and the stern look on his face. And this is the best part, people can see the enthusiasm for your research and how lucky you are to live in Gettysburg. So
I'm so lucky. We moved here because we love Gettysburg so much.
yeah. So the question is, excuse me, Scott asks, he says he's wondering if the Beller family, Behler, because I noticed it was spelled, you mentioned it was spelled two different ways, Boehler, Boehler, and then Bohler, and then Behler. So Scott mentioned he's wondering if the family could be located somehow, because it is kind of an unusual name.
You know, I had nowhere to turn. I went in the census records, trying to find, this is before I found out that he had died in 1864. I couldn't find him in any censuses. I couldn't find the Samuel, Beller or Bowler. So I had nowhere to go. I looked in Find a Grave, couldn't find anything. When you don't have anything to go on, you don't know, how to reach any family members.
Right.
But it's funny because in a different photo that I have, which maybe will feature on another program like this, I was able to find somebody related to somebody ID'd on my photo, which was really interesting. A living person who, an ancestor of hers was related. So that can happen, but in this case, there was just so many dead ends. Poor guy.
Yeah. Thank you so
That's
much.
why I'm
It
glad
is
he at least
difficult.
lives in his photo, thank God, because
Yeah.
it's like he's lost to obscurity, the poor.
Yeah,
poor
it's
man.
super difficult when there's so many different potential spellings, right? And there are a lot for that name. So let's see, Kurt Luther, come to the screen. Somebody send Kurt to the screen for us. Kurt, I love that your favorite photo is also the one that you first identified using the Photo Sleuth platform for facial recognition to identify photographs. How many more have you identified since?
Well, that is a good question. I personally have probably identified dozens. I don't know how many dozens, but it's been a number of years. But the site is free and it's public, so anyone can sign up, anyone can use it. And our user base now has something like 18 or 19,000 registered users on the site. So lots of people have used the site, and they have done many more identifications than I have. I'm sure there have been hundreds and probably thousands, but I can't say for sure.
I see at least one posted. It seems like every time I go onto Facebook or the internet or somewhere, somebody's posting about, oh, I identified another photo using the Photo Sleuth platform. So,
right. And I'm always grateful when people share one of those stories, as they sometimes do. Rick Brown has been kind enough to share a few of his success stories in the Civil War Faces group on Facebook, which I always appreciate, and I encourage other folks to do that as well. Help spread the word.
great. Well, I enjoy this site a lot, and I have not shared any stories recently with you, but I'll send you some pretty soon. Let's see. I'm going to bring Kevin. If I can get Kevin to turn his video back on. Kevin, I'm going to bring you back to the screen. There's a couple of questions for you. Let's see. Everybody loves the images that you shared, of course. Touching photographs with a great story. And but Chad would like to know, how did you get both photos? Did they come together? Did you buy them at the same time? Had they been kept in the family together? You know, all that. And
Sure.
tell us about the engraving around the outside of the husband. Someone commented on that.
Sure. I'll answer that one first, because I think that's probably a little easier. So that the brass mat around the photo of the soldier, which has that patriotic theme, those are mass produced. There are a few varieties that are similar. Most of them had more of like a geometric or figural, like flower pattern or something like that. They're, like most images, I think at the time, what we would call like tin types, amber types, had some kind of brass mat over them to frame them. Not all of them, but probably most of them, it's fair to say. But a small, like, then there's a million varieties, a lot of different varieties. A few, maybe, I forget what the total number is. I think it's kind of known, maybe 3-4 different varieties of that patriotic theme. This just happens to be one of them. So it was probably a choice at the time it was purchased. Although it has been 160 some odd years. So it is certainly very possible that over time it changed. And not necessarily modern either. But I mean, that's the origin of it. It's a mass-produced item that would have been marketed towards people who are buying photographs. As far as how I came to acquire these images, so one of the most important things about photo collecting is relationships, and so you can kind of operate on the margins and kind of do everything online without meeting anybody these days, but there are so many great images in private hands, and so many collectors who are willing to open their collections up to you. And as you build trust and build friendships, I think what tends to happen is you start to see how your collections complement each other. And so in the case of this particular set of images, they were beloved by another collector, a good friend of mine, and who happened to like something I had more. And so it was kind of a natural fit. And that's just everybody has a particular spin on what they collect. And so this wasn't some kind of like eBay slugfest or, out of the woods type of find. I love those. Those are always so exciting, and you always feel very accomplished.
You didn't have to drive to St. Louis in the middle of the night or
no, I would definitely, I'm in New Jersey. I would definitely drive to St. Louis in the middle of the night to get those images that Adam showed. But this was a more of a friendly transaction.
Well, good. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I just passed William Griffing's comment, who said, thank you so much for setting this up, Ron. He enjoyed it, and we all did so much. And Mr. Griffing, I just want to mention, while I've got your comment there so that I don't forget, how much we all appreciate what you do with the Shared and Spared website. I've used it many times and found all kinds of great information there, and it really is a help to all the image collectors and researchers. We just appreciate everything that you do. So thanks for your comments tonight, and thanks for joining us. There's all kind of great comments in here for you guys. The panel that that provided the presentations. Everybody just loved the program tonight. And they have some other comments that I'll pass along to y'all privately or in an email because we're just running out of time. But I do want to go ahead and let you know who's coming next week, because somebody asked if we were, if we would be having, if we have these things regularly. And as a matter of fact, we actually, Ron and I just talked today, and we think that we want to do this again really soon because we had such a great time last time in July, and this one tonight was so great. So we do want you to know who's coming up and how you can take advantage of these programs at other times. So before we get to all that, though, we definitely want to thank everyone who was here tonight with us. As I mentioned, thank you so much, Ron, for the organization, the recruiting, the panelists, hosting for us, all of those things. We just love to work with you, and it's such a pleasure every single time.
Well, thanks. You guys are fantastic. I love working with you too. The feeling is mutual. And I believe that today we also decided on a date for the next showcase. It'll be April 13th. So stay tuned for details on that. So I can't wait.
I know, I can't either. I'm so excited, and I'm glad we went ahead and got a date on the calendar because our series is filling up. So we wanted to go ahead and get that date on the calendar so that even though we don't know what the subject will be or what the topic will be, I really like this format that we used tonight, but we've done one with, we did one in July that was everyone brought their favorite Gettysburg image, and that was fantastic. So I don't know, we'll have to see.
Yeah. But I loved tonight listening to everybody talk. I was completely spellbound just listening to everyone talk about their experiences, because we've all had experiences like that. And just to be with a group of folks who have had that shared experience, it's just wonderful. So thanks to everyone for participating. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. Michelle, Rick, Kevin, Ron, Adam, Paul, Mike, Kurt, and David, thank you all for sharing those images. They were fantastic, way exceeded my expectations. I mean, I was just blown away by some of those images and the stories. I just love the stories that go with them. So just so you guys know, we always like to thank our associates and encourage you to frequent their services or purchase their books or those kind of things. And so we want to do a little shout out to Military Images tonight. And I asked Ron for an image to promote with, and this is just fantastic. I love the Reese cover there, but anyway, so Military Images is America's only magazine dedicated solely to the study of portrait photographs of Civil War soldiers, established in 1979. Its ongoing mission, of course, is to showcase, interpret, and preserve these rare images. I'm a subscriber myself, and there never fails to be an issue where I don't learn a whole lot because I'm not an experienced collector. So every issue of Military Images that arrives brings a new lesson for me, and I encourage everyone to become a subscriber. You can subscribe or renew your subscription. Super easy to do that. Just visit the website there. Tina has typed the link into the chat box. And Tina, if you'll enter that again, because there's 28 new messages below that. So shopmilitaryimages.com will get you to the website where you can subscribe or renew your lapsed subscription. And like I said, it's super easy to do it right there on the website. So if you're not already a subscriber, go in and subscribe. And if you're already a subscriber, go in and renew your subscription for another 5 years or 10 years or.
Lifetime subscription.
Absolutely.
I'll add that these issues are like children, like my children. So to pick one would be almost impossible.
Well, it's super easy for me because I just love that Reese one. But while we've got this image up, there's more exciting news from Military Images. A collection of profiles from Military Images will be featured in a new book, and the name is going to be Gettysburg Faces, to be published by Gettysburg Publishing LLC. And what can you tell us? We want insider info. What can we expect to see in the new book? When is it going to be released? Give us all the.
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of the the nitty gritty. This is a collection of 100 images of Union and Confederate soldiers and other participants. You will meet infantrymen, artillerymen, cavalrymen, signal officers, medical personnel, nurses. I tried to select a range of images and stories that have all been published in the magazine over the last 8 years to give a sense of not only the battle, but the entire Gettysburg campaign. So you'll find 100 personal stories, each with an image of that individual from June to mid-July of 1863. And together, those individual personal stories tell the larger story of the battle and the campaign. The images and the stories together it took so long to narrow it down because we published over 150 photographs and stories in the magazine, from images with short captions to full-blown feature stories. So to collect all those images and then rewrite and research all the stories to make them consistent in length and have them all feel like a cohesive narrative. I spent a good chunk of last year doing that, and I loved every moment of it. And some of the individuals that participated tonight, their images are featured in the magazine, or pardon me, in the book. One last detail that I'll add is this is not the first time that a book has spun out of military images. Back around 1990, our founding editor, Harry Roach, did a book on the cavalry based on the same thing that I've done with Gettysburg. So it's not an original idea, but it's something that I wanted to achieve because that was a vision that Harry Roach, our founding editor, had, is to be able to take that next step and take collected photographs and stories and push that out to new audiences to be able to continue that tradition of storytelling around the Civil War to future generations. So Gettysburg Faces is the first under my editorship. I would love to do another one. I don't know what that's going to be yet, but that's a story for another episode of Civil War Talk on Zoom.
Right. Well, we always expect you to share all the inside scoop with us. So thanks for doing that. And we look forward to that, to the release of that book. And we will be glad to have you on then when it comes out to promote the book.
Great. Well, more to come. Stay tuned for details.
Absolutely. So many thanks again to all Ron and all the panelists tonight. It was fantastic and I enjoyed it so much. And now it seems a little strange, but I'm going to promo my own gig. And so, so if you missed this last time, I did this presentation on December 15th. And it filled just like tonight's program filled. And so I'm going to do a repeat. And this is not going to be promoted to the public until January 25th. So the program will be on next Thursday, January 27th at 8:30. And it's on a Thursday night, not a Wednesday. We usually do this on Wednesday. But it filled to the public last time and a lot of people got shut out. So I'm going to do it again. And if you want to participate, go ahead and copy that link from the chat box and get registered as soon as you can, because like I said, we're going to list it publicly on the 25th. And these things are filling up every week. So if you want to see that, especially if you missed it last time and you wanted to come but couldn't, go ahead and copy that link and get registered. On February 2nd, we'll feature Michael E. Block. He'll be here to talk about his brand new book, The Carnage Was Fearful, The Battle of Cedar Mountain, August 9th, 1862. It's brand new and part of Savis Beatty's Emerging Civil War series. And we'll be pleased to host Mr. Block here on February 2nd. That is on a Wednesday night, our regular night, Wednesday night. And on February 9th, you won't want to miss Sarah K. Byerly on her latest book, Call Out the Cadets. the Battle of Newmarket, May 15th, 1864, which is also part of Savas Beatty's Emerging Civil War series. And we are very much looking forward to meeting and hosting her on February 9th, and hope that you'll join us for that. And on February 16th, our guest will be M. Chris Bryan on his brand new book, Cedar Mountain to Antietam, A Civil War Campaign History of the Union 12th Corps, July to September 1862. And it is scheduled for release this month. So we will be among the very first to hear about it, and hope that you'll join us when he's here with us on February 16th at 8:30. I hope you'll all join me next week on Thursday, January 27th for a repeat of the Angel of Marie's Heights. And again, that, oh, the link's broken. Tina, can you go find that link somewhere? I'll find it and give it to you in just a minute. So hang out. If you want the link, I'll get you a link. So if you can't join us on Thursday, I am going to put the link in the chat, so don't leave if you want it. But if you can't join us on Thursday, I hope that you'll be here on Wednesday, February 2nd at 8:30 for Michael E. Block. And we thank you so much for joining us. And thank you again, Ron, for putting this all together. It was fantastic. See everybody next week.
Thank you. Take care.